Good afternoon. It's 12. Just waiting for the other panelists, but I'll start. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Thanks for coming. My name is Gustavo Faleiros. I'm a Brazilian journalist, Director of Environmental Investigations for the Pulitzer Center. So it's a great honor for me to host this panel on Pantropical investigations. So I can see a lot of familiar faces, but some new ones as well, and happy that you're interested on environmental issues and the tropics is specific. So at the Pulitzer Center, we have this initiative that's called the Rainforest Investigations Network. And that's the projects that we will see today are coming from fellows that have collaborated on investigations about the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and the forests of Southeast Asia. And RIN, as we call this network, exists since 2020. And the goal is really to raise the issue of the destruction of rainforests, the raise into the public conscious and the public sphere. And the reason we are doing this is really because this is such a timely issue. As you probably know, rainforests are the center of the climate negotiations, but also for us, it's very important to make this point, and we'll see in these investigations of Anton and Andres, that is just getting here, welcome Andres, that the supply chains that are present in all our lives. I used to say, like, in each room that we're doing this talks, we'll find traces of products that are produced in the rainforest. I'm, for example, staying in this Choco Hotel. Some of you might be staying in the Chocolate Hotel as well. So cocoa, as you know, are produced in the rainforest. The coffee that we're drinking here in Italy are produced in the rainforest. The gold in our mobiles are coming either from the Congo Basin or the Amazon. Just to say a few things, but a cliche that is very important, that everything is connected, and the rainforests are the center of the supply chains and the economic sectors that are present in our lives. And so the complexity of these supply chains kind of require us to work as collaborators. We need collaborations to really make sense of the causes of the destruction that are happening in the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and the forests of Southeast Asia. And this network that is going now for the 4th cohort has been doing this with stories like Anton and Andres will show, that allows us to really understand the causes over time as well, because this is a problem that is happening since the 70s, for example, in the Amazon. We have a big rate of destruction of the forest, but will last for many years. So we need these collaborations to really be able to deal with the complexity of these problems. I will soon introduce Anton and Andres, but I want to emphasize just the aspect of collaboration, that is not only about publishing joint stories, as sometimes happen, and that's the holy grail for us, to have like journalists from the global north and the global south collaborating, but the collaboration really in networks like this happen in a very lively and dynamic way. So we have trainings, exchange of methodologies. Sometimes journalists from different regions are exchanging sources and ways of doing these investigations. So the collaborations, as I was saying, is really lively. What we're going to see today here is actually collaborations that made to the joint publication. As I was saying, like, this is the holy grail for us. So we'll see examples like Anton and Andres that have published with American outlets. A big challenge for us is really finding, like the local journalists to work with mainstream media, and these cases will show some of this. But let me introduce these two panelists. As you probably see also, we had a third panelist that couldn't be here because of health issues. This is Josiane Kouagou. She's a journalist based in Cameroon, working from Le Monde. So before Anton and Andres present, I'll pass it on. I'll show a short video from Josiane for you. But here on my right is Anton de Gada, is a Filipino journalist based in Cambodia. worked for many years for the Southeast Asia Globe, was a RIN fellow, two-time RIN fellow. Welcome, Anton. And Andres Bermudez, Colombian journalist, working as an editor and investigative journalist for El Clip, have worked in several mainstream media Colombian outlets as well, and also RIN fellow. Let me start then just playing Josiane's video, which, as I said, unfortunately couldn't be here with us, and then we'll have Anton's presentation, Andres, and time for questions. So let's see if the audio comes.
Bonjour à tous. My name is Josiane Coague. I'm a journalist based in Cameroon. Between 2022 and 2023, I work on illegal logging in Cameroon with my colleague Marlene Dega. How did we start? At the beginning, we both applied to the Rainforest Investigations Network of Tourism Center with our different ideas. Mine was investigating illegal logging from the forest to the seaports. Madeleine's ideas was investigating illegal logging from the forest to the international market. And during our discussion with the Rainforest Investigations Network team and the other fellows, we find out that we can join our different ideas to produce a strong project. We spoke with our different editors. Unfortunately, again, for us, they were okay. That is how we start our radical collaboration. When I say radical collaboration, I really mean it because we work on everything together. We plan our field trip together. We did interviews together. We contacted sources together. We even worked together, everything. During these 12 months of work, we faced a lot of challenges, from security to access to sources. For example, we spent weeks planning our field trip. We work with a local trust source, and we even come in Douala to meet us so we can plan everything well. Access to sources was another challenge. We use documents and reports to find some hiding information. And after a year of work, we published 7 investigations, 3 in Le Monde and 4 in Info Congo. This series shows how illegal timber is logged from the Cameroon forest to the international market. And we got a lot of reaction, a lot. 5 days after our publication, the Cameroonian Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife reacted to our stories. He sent an administrative letter to his regional representatives and the director of forest control points, ordering them to reinforce forest control because here there was a lot of illegal timber being transported across the country. Radio France International, one of the most popular radio in French-speaking African countries, did a podcast to highlight the main findings of our investigations. We also got reactions from many Cameroonians, NGOs across the country. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay. We didn't want to miss Josiane, of course, if she was here. We would have much more context, but I really invite you to take a look on this investigation. It's open on Info Congo. Le Monde has a paywall, but it's really well done. And as she said, like, it was very important for for the understanding of the whole timber smuggling in the Cameroon. I will now invite Anton to do his presentation. Would you control here?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Gustavo and I have a bet that I can't do this in 10 minutes, so let's see if I can prove him wrong. So today I'll be chatting about Cambodia's monkey business and 3 years of collaborative investigations into this billion-dollar primate trade that 3 years ago I had no idea existed. So to make sure that we're all on the same page, if people aren't familiar, Cambodia is in the heart of the Mekong region. It's the core of the Mekong in mainland Southeast Asia and is home to some of our rainforests. And while originally we had pitched investigative stories into the timber trade, this turned into a wildlife trafficking story. And I've been there for about 3 years now. And my intention today is for everyone to walk out of here with the idea of how this whole collaborative investigation came together, kind of the anatomy of it. Because if you had asked me 3 years ago if I could have led something like this, I absolutely would have said no. So I wanted to show how natural the process was and a few of the steps that I took to, wind up here. So again, when I first joined the Southeast Asia Globe in Cambodia, I was writing too long, naturally as a young and eager reporter. So my editor said, okay, no more long investigations on the environment. Go out and write us a quick feature on cultural stories in Cambodia. So I pitched a story about these monkey bloggers in Angkor Wat, and their job is to follow around monkeys and live stream them onto Facebook and YouTube. And I was like, okay, that's brilliant, 800 words, quick feature. But it was actually these gentlemen that told me about the real monkey business in Cambodia. And that is what turned into a 3-year-long investigation with 3 partners across a dozen stories in 2 languages. And what's crazy is that I never even filed the blogger story. That never made it to publication. So I apologize to my Southeast Asia Globe editors. They never did get that quick hit out of me. But before I get into the anatomy of the story, I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page about what this is about. So I'm talking about long-tailed macaques. It's an endemic species in Southeast Asia. They're quite a small monkey, and for us, they're common. But over the course of our investigation, they have been now reclassified as endangered. And they're actually the most traded primate in the world. And the reason for that is they're used in the vaccine developments by American laboratories and pharmaceutical companies. So this is a big shock, and like Gustavo mentioned, everything in the rainforests does affect us. If anyone here has been vaccinated for COVID-19 by an American vaccine, you have personally benefited from experiments on Cambodian monkeys. So that is naturally what made this such a global story. And we'll start with the Americans, but it doesn't end there. So that's what we're talking about. These are the long-tailed macaques. Naturally, when I first started, people thought I was talking about 10, 20, 30 monkeys. I'm talking about 32,000 monkeys in a single year being pulled out of Cambodian forests and heading to the States. 3 in every 5 went to the US, and that made up nearly 80% of the entire global trade. This is quite new. Cambodia had been contributing to the monkey trade for more than a decade, but following the outbreak of COVID-19, China canceled their wildlife trade, and Cambodia usurped them as the #1 trader of macaques. To be completely frank, Cambodia is not #1 for a lot of things, so the fact that we were #1 in the global primate trade was actually a pretty big deal, and that's what led to this investigation. The really important aspect as the local reporter on the ground was the fact that this was accessible to Cambodians. This was a story that actually hadn't been covered at all. We were leading the world in exports of Cambodian macaques, and nobody in the country knew that. So my host newsroom at the time, the Southeast Asia Globe, was kind of the core outlet that led to this multiple story investigation with 3 other partners. But every single story that we did published with them, thanks to the Pulitzer Center, we translated all of that into Khmer, which is the local language there, and made sure that this was as accessible as possible. Our story covered a bit of everything. Naturally, the breakdown of the trade, Cambodia's recent promotion to the #1 exporter in the world, and then naturally the very dramatic arrest of a Cambodian official in the US, the indictment of another, and the indictment of 6 members of the largest monkey farm in Cambodia. So that's what all of this was kind of covering and adding to over the years. There was a lot of local impact. First and foremost, something that I think mattered a lot to me at the time as a new reporter in Cambodia that was making his way in Southeast Asia was that because of the seriousness of our coverage, other controversial characters in Cambodia were willing to speak to me. And I thought that was quite noteworthy. So this is Swana Gauntlet. She runs one of the most notorious conservation organizations in the country. A couple months back, they had a Human Rights Watch report on human rights violations in one of their carbon credit forests. We were the only group of journalists that she spoke to, and she specifically cited our monkey coverage because of that. So I think that was an immediate local impact, that people trusted us and knew that we would get the story right. On top of that, again, thanks to the Pulitzer Center, we hosted as many possible public events as we could. I'm not sure if written stories in the Khmer language or in English is really how we reach new audiences, and I wanted to make sure this got to students. So we hosted a photo exhibition, we had a student day, we had the main opening night, and this is actually the American ambassador and the EU ambassador to Cambodia who had no idea this trade was going on. So that's what I mean by making sure that the journalism that we were doing was accessible in other ways outside of just our reporting. And whenever we could, we got this in front of people as often as possible. So every event that we were invited to, we made sure that this was a big part of that coverage, including a lot of events with Cambodian students. The American angle, of course, led to our largest collaboration with NBC. Naturally, the fact that billions of dollars worth of monkeys are making it to the States for the American development program of vaccines was a big story for them, and that took about a year to put together with a wonderful team of reporters out of New York. Naturally, we did well on the award scale, but to be honest, that wasn't the most significant aspect to me. Naturally, I was very happy to present those awards to Gustavo, but what I cared more about was the fact that a month after our story went live, a subpoena was issued to the US pharmaceutical company that was importing these macaques. We won't claim credit for that, but I do think that's quite interesting. On top of that, following our story, a few shareholders for the company actually got together and sued the company for hiding their Cambodian imports, and we've been interviewed by the lawyers representing shareholders. So to me, that was the biggest impact that the story could have had. We informed the people who are benefiting from this trade, and they got upset at the company that they're investing in and are taking action. Now, after the end of our American project, Gustavo and I thought we were done. We thought, okay, fantastic, holy grail, we did the thing, we had the American publication, the Southeast Asian publication, but then the company, after the subpoena, promised to stop importing from Cambodia. And I, of course, made the terrible mistake of fact-checking that. And they hadn't. They had stopped importing Cambodian monkeys to the US, but began importing them into Canada. So naturally, poor Gustavo, I pitched him again, and I said, actually, the story continues. We need another 6-month-long investigation into the Cambodian monkey trade. And that's how we ended up partnering with the Toronto Star. My bad. The story thankfully went live. I always counted it as an impact that these stories actually exist. Like, the free press in Cambodia and Southeast Asia is quite difficult. So the fact that these stories actually make it to a public audience with local reporting is a big deal. We're going to get into this later, but this was the story that required the most amount of field reporting. So we'll chat about safety perhaps in the Q&A and what that took. This was, or some of the equipment I used to stay safe. And this was the first time that we had drone footage from multiple farms in Cambodia. And I want to be clear, these are industrial scale farms. It takes quite a lot of infrastructure to export 32,000 monkeys, and this is what it looks like. And there are multiple of these across Cambodia. In terms of impact, the gentleman who had been indicted actually reached out to me after the Canada investigation came live, which I thought was crazy because he had been ignoring me for about 3 years. And then like 2 days after it went live, he emailed me about it, which I thought was stunning. And at least made me realize that he was reading our coverage. So he was also indicted by the DOJ. Again, there wasn't supposed to be more coverage. But I got into an argument with my German publisher, and he, of course, was making fun of the Americans and the Canadians, saying that it's crazy that they're importing all these monkeys from this indicted trade of macaques. He's like, this would never happen in Europe. And I was like, well, let me fact check. Oh, shouldn't have done it. In a stunning turn of events, the Americans take the live monkeys, and after they kill them on these toxicity tests, dice them up, and then export them to the EU. So naturally, we pitched another story. And I wanted to be clear, this is what I mean by anybody can do these types of investigations. These monkeys were going to the UK, to Germany, to France, to Austria. So if you haven't covered Cambodia in the past, you still can. This is all public data. So this is all terrible because poor Gustavo, I had actually pitched him a deforestation story, and this was our third collaboration on macaques. And just because we're in Italy, and I'm so blessed to be here in Perugia, I want to make sure that it is known that while Italy isn't the #1 importer of Cambodian specimens, they were the largest importers in 2020 and 2021. So this is what I'm talking about. Cambodia might seem far, it might seem remote, but a lot of what's happening in our rainforests do affect every single person in the EU, and the US, and Canada. So this is what I mean by trying to encourage folks to look a bit bigger than just your borders. And you have people like me all over the world that are willing to work with you. That story actually became the course of the main core part of a study. Nobody had actually looked into the specimen trade. We'd all been obsessed with live monkeys from Cambodia going to the US, but there was actually a huge trade of specimens afterwards. And that means these pharmaceutical companies that were already benefiting from the live trade were then making a profit on the specimens and cut up pieces of these monkeys further on. And that kind of elongated this indicted supply chain. All of this has led to continued coverage, and that's probably the aspect of this that I'm the most proud about. So Bloomberg Businessweek hired me out to take photos for their investigation into the same trade. We've been reached out to a couple folks that want to do a documentary on the extinction business and how this trade for vaccine development is pushing these monkeys to the brink of extinction. And I think that's just like the most important aspect. Yes, these stories went out, we had impact in the moment, but the fact that this coverage is continuing 3 years after our first story is what I'm most proud about. This is now reaching new audiences all over the world. And naturally, I do want to stay in touch because I think this is a much longer conversation about how this collaboration works. We were signing MOUs, we were talking about publication rights, we were coming up with co-posts, and it naturally is a difficult thing to do, especially when we have a little brother newsroom in Cambodia and then a big brother newsroom like NBC or the Toronto Star. So that was a delicate balance that we came up with together. And 11 minutes!
You lost the bet. You lost the bet. But thanks, Anton. He's a star. We know. But various interesting aspects, and one that I'm going to highlight is the kind of the time frame for these investigations. For us at this network, the real proud is to set up some of these new conversations, like the monkey business that nobody was aware of. We have some kind of successes, like if you saw a story about airstrips in the Amazon, we are the ones mapping that one in the New York Times. Or like the collagen, someone has saw the story about the collagen in the UK. So there's new things, there's new supply chains that you never would imagine that are connected to the rainforest. We are helping these guys to unveil. But we had an arrangement here that I will do questions in between the presentations. I'll do a short question to Anton. At the end, we'll have time for questions. I would like you to talk more about this balance, because NBC is a big partner. They have like an entire investigative unit. How is it? Because sometimes this is an important discussion for this forum here about the balance between global South journalists or local reporting partners and like big stars of mainstream media in the global North. NBC is great. They've been doing all the bylines for Anton on the top together with the top investigative journalists. But can you tell us how you struck that balance, and to be fair, how they could be fair with your collaboration?
Yeah, I'd say the most important thing for Global South reporters specifically is to get this all in writing. I think a lot of journalists are very kind-hearted and are happy to collaborate. Not all editors are, especially if you're working from a newsroom that no one's ever heard of. So we had every single one of these collaborations develop a publication agreement. And it walked through who gets the credit, how everyone publishes at the same time, and how this collaboration is actually going to work. And yes, those were kind of painful at times. I think it took us about 20 emails and 2 weeks to get the Toronto Star thing figured out. Same with the NBC, but it is worth it, and it protects us throughout the entire process because we can always go back to that shared promise. The reporters are wonderful, but naturally once you're getting closer to publication and people want to jump the gun, and maybe you're asleep, but they're not, they might just decide to publish it ahead of you, and suddenly everything starts to unravel. So I'd say those MOUs and publication agreements were really key. And then of course, developing a really personal relationship with your teammates. So that NBC collaboration was across 4 reporters, but I really only worked with one quite closely. And I would say that he was my advocate in the NBC newsroom when I was asleep in Cambodia because of the time zones. So I'd say getting it in writing, people will say, oh, don't worry, we talked about it on a call. Oh, yeah, I have it over the course of 30 emails. And I'm like, no, get the paper out, get Gustavo to sign it and put the Pulitzer stamp on it, and make sure that every editor who's leading the investigations signs off on it as well. And I think that's a really important promise to have at the beginning that protects Global South reporters at the end of the day. And that's something that I'm really happy to chat more about. I think people were surprised that we went through the pain of signing MOUs with every single collaborative newsroom. I can't stress it enough. It protects us on the back end of the deal. Everyone's happy to collaborate in the beginning, but the second you get closer to publication and the stress starts rising, that's when people start getting stepped on, especially as smaller newsrooms. So I'd say that was the biggest thing.
Thank you, Anton. So now we're going to hear from Andres Bermudez. I'll have time for the end, okay? Just to make sure that we go for Andres.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Gustavo was speaking about how there's supply chains that you don't imagine, and not only supply chains, but there's also value chains that you don't imagine and that are equally international and cross-border. And the carbon offset world is one of them, which is basically the way how a lot of the companies, both large and smaller, in all of our countries are actually lowering or compensating their carbon footprint. So we've been looking at this for like this for 3 years now, actually. Why did we do this? I think for us the initial question was, are the valuable climate solutions and the valuable climate finance mechanisms that we've designed worldwide, are they working properly? And are they achieving the goals that they've set out to achieve? And if not, why not? And also, if not, especially, is somebody benefiting from this reality? And if so as well, is this allowing companies worldwide to overclaim their environmental results and as a result of that greenwash their reputation? And so and why does it matter as well? So we concentrated on one type of project called the RED project, because it's the one that basically, in a nutshell, what it does is it joins two parts together. On the one side, there's local communities that protect forests that are considered strategic to mitigate climate change worldwide. And on the other hand, you have companies who want to buy those environmental results in the form of carbon credits to compensate their own carbon footprint. And it's a win-win situation on paper if it works properly. What did we find on the ground? That a lot of the times it doesn't work this way. And by a lot of the times, we are seeing that it's increasingly, a lot of the times. These are not exceptions. Just like Anton, I thought that my first carbon story was going to be my last. And the minute we published it, 2 days later, we were already getting tip-offs of next stories that we started writing. And we've written 17 already over the course of 3 years, including several follow-up pieces, detailing problems in all sorts of carbon credit projects that have been bought and used by companies that you may know, like Delta Airlines or Chevron and a bunch of others, both local and international that you may not know as well. But we found, we've already uncovered, we began in Colombia and we've already uncovered problems in projects in Brazil, Honduras, and we're currently working in 5 other countries of Latin America. And this for us was so interesting. Like every single story we have published has had someone come up to us and tell us, I have another one for you, which has been something that I had never experienced in my career before. This is what did we find? This is a very, very abbreviated list of things we found just to show you like the kind of problems that you can find. This is on our side, let's say like the supply side of the carbon credits, not the demand side. But we found flawed consultations with indigenous communities, projects that created or stoked existing social fractures, projects that overstated or duplicated environmental results, so problems of hot air and double accounting, ultimate beneficial owners with legally complicated pasts that were, of course, never revealed to the local communities, or that local communities did not know about, but were also reaping part of the project revenue. Communities with no access to project documents, no access to the revenue accountability of the project, so, basically the money and how it's spent. Auditors and certifying standards that did not spot those problems and therefore never acted as the checks and balances that they're supposed to. Conflicts of interest, including, for example, developers hiring their former business partners to audit them independently. And of course, companies buying credits with no due diligence, to ensure that the credits they're buying are good quality. Or even in this case of the picture you're seeing here, entire indigenous communities that had never even heard of projects that were not only up and running, but had already sold hundreds of thousands of credits to, in this case, Chevron. This may be an exception because it's like an extreme case, but this happens. So how did we get there? And I want to emphasize this part. I think what Marina Walker from the Pulitzer Center and formerly ICIJ calls radical sharing, I think that's the heart of some of these very complicated stories because, and I want to say this, in my 12 years as an environmental journalist, I had never ever seen a subject matter that had such a steep learning curve. It took me, I think it was 10 months for my first story on carbon credits to go out. And it's just such a complicated, technically complex subject matter that it requires, a lot of, bridging that gap is very difficult. And that's why my reflection upon, after all these investigations, is the only way of shortening this learning gap is to work together. And there's 3 forms of working together that we have put into place in this project. Like, the more obvious one, we're collaborating among journalists. And right now we have a group of journalists from 14 media outlets in 8 Latin American countries, and we're working together, not just sharing information, but as Gustavo was saying earlier, we're sharing know-how, we're sharing methodologies, we're sharing sources, we're sharing ways of understanding things because, maybe you don't have the answer, but I can help you find it quicker than you would if you were on your own. And we're publishing together, of course. But then there's other forms of collaboration that sometimes we're not that aware of. One is, for me, a very important one has been whistleblowers. We've all had whistleblowers as sources, and of course, in environmental subject matters, in any technically complex subject matter, this is very important. But for me, understanding that a lot of the times, the problem wasn't lack of regulation, but lack of enforcement of regulation. Some of our countries do have very interesting regulatory frameworks, but are simply not being put into place. And what we did was we went and searched for the former public officials that had drafted that regulation. And what we found was that they're incredibly frustrated by the things that are happening and the way that their frameworks are not being used by the governments that they worked for before. And so they became not only our key sources, but the people we went to understand a lot of the things, because a lot of the times you're not sure that what you see is exactly what happened, or that you're interpreting things correctly. So we would go to them and ask them, like, this is what I think I understand here. Can you help me understand? Am I interpreting this correctly? Can you help me understand this, or can you help me find the exact piece of regulation that allows me to prove that there's wrongdoing here, or that somebody omitted their work? And it has been an incredibly productive collaboration. We've worked with just in Colombia, with at least 12 whistleblowers. Some of them know each other. Some of them know each other publicly, but they don't know they're helping the same people. We even have current public officials now also as whistleblowers, and it's been an incredibly rewarding challenge. And we've also started collaborating with specialized organizations, including scientists, because we think that this is the way also forward. We all have scientists and specialized experts as sources, but I think we can collaborate with them as well further along the line than just having a journalist-source relationship. We've partnered up with 2 centers, very specialized centers already. One is Carbon Market Watch, based in Belgium. They're carbon market experts, and they helped us calculate the deforestation baseline of a project, because what we found out was that basically the largest carbon credit project in Colombia was inflating its results, but I had no way not only of proving it, but of showing how bad the problem was. And they helped me reconstruct the deforestation baseline for this project, because this is a very complicated mathematical equation that requires forest engineers. And we proved that it was 5 times higher than the official deforestation rate that Colombia had submitted to the UN climate change framework. And the only way of doing this is by working with them. And they published a report on the same day that we published our investigation. There was also an MOU involved, some nitty-gritty details to sort, but it works, and it's incredibly more potent than if you do it alone. In our case, it was funny because we got Western, global North media outlets citing our research just because they read the report, not because they read us as journalists. But it was fine. We got a front page of The Guardian, online at least, thanks to the fact that they had read the report by our partners. And therefore, we got a lot more impact than we had searched. And we've recently also collaborated for a story that's yet to appear in a couple of weeks, 2 maybe, with the Center for Climate Crime Analysis in the Netherlands, and they're former prosecutors for environmental crimes, and they're helping us understand illegal logging sites within carbon credit projects. And that's also some satellite technology, calculations of volume of wood that none of us can do on our own. So collaborating, there's a lot of ways of collaborating that we sometimes don't think about. What happens afterwards? To me, the most interesting impact has been seeing that local communities are using our journalism to ask tough questions to the people they're working with in this business, and even as far as in several very problematic cases, to file legal actions against these projects. And we see our infographics continuously rotating on WhatsApps from local indigenous communities. This is difficult because, I mean, not only is the subject matter dry and complex, but our stories are all, because it's so difficult, they're all 5,000 to 8,000 words long, because proving this is difficult. You have to have a lot of documentary evidence. And these people are using it a lot of the time. In two of the cases, there have been, they've reached high instances of court. There was one local community, the one that didn't know anything about the project. They already won a lawsuit in first and second instances to get the project suspended. They used our evidence in all their actions. And another one got their case to be selected by Colombia's Supreme Court. It's still pending ruling, but it was very interesting because the court said, we have to look into this because of its constitutional novelty. And we have a very respected, worldwide respected Supreme Court, and we're all, waiting for this ruling to come out because it's going to set precedent. But it's very, very intriguing to see how other people in other areas that never thought about this are looking at it. Human rights and business people, the same thing. They're starting to see, oh my God, we have to go into carbon credits, and they're using our information. The climate litigation databases worldwide are also using it. And there's one other thing I would like to emphasize, which are of the challenges, and Anton was speaking about physical challenges. I also think that we have to keep in mind our legal safety. In all my years as a journalist, I never had worked on anything where actors were so aggressive about legally harassing and intimidating us. Just to show you the complexity of a carbon story, usually because of how many actors are involved in the chain, there's usually minimum 5 to 9 fairness requests, so there's a lot of people you're going to piss off, and you need legal reviews to accompany you along the way because they are very, very aggressive, and it's something worth keeping in mind. You probably always do it. And bottom line, I think that we need journalistic scrutiny to help identify problems and problem makers in environmental solutions, and we need it basically to help ensure that valuable climate solutions actually work properly like the way they're set out to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andres. And you can see another great example. The thing is that Andres, after doing all these stories, he's launching a new network. He's launching the network of people who will need to know how to investigate carbon. He's helping to train several other journalists in other countries, writing methodologies about how to investigate carbon credits. So the collaborations, again, is not only having the byline together in the stories, like it's go beyond that, as on the engagement events, on publishing methodologies, creating new networks, creating new knowledge. So we are very, very proud of all you're doing. I will skip my questions because we will have like more 10 minutes of this session, so I would love to get some questions from the floor. I saw our friend there was one first one and a second one over there. Let's get this 2 first and then we have more. The microphone, please, and please identify yourself.
Yeah, my name is Carlos. I'm a Spanish journalist. If I understood correctly, regarding the live monkey trade, the American companies were importing them or buying them for vaccine research purposes, right? But what I didn't get is what are European companies buying dead pieces of dead monkeys for?
Well, that is a great question. So the biggest thing that the European companies were buying the dead monkeys for was research. So while the Americans were developing the vaccines, the Europeans, from my understanding, which is it took a lot of data to try to figure out exactly where these countries were importing them in and who in those countries were importing. It was looking and continued research into animal testing. So a big question that the trade is trying to figure out is if this is actually scientifically viable. So we've always tested on primates, but there are actually new groups that want to say that we don't need that and that we should be using new technologies to test our vaccines in other ways. So I think that's actually leading to the trade in Europe as well. On top of that, there are European vaccine developers as well. So there is a live trade of Cambodian macaques to Europe, but the biggest trade in Europe, and I want to give this tip to every European journalist here, is from Mauritius. So Mauritius is the #1 funder of live macaques to Europe, so I hope everyone's writing that down. And Cambodia is the #1 live macaque exporter to the US. So live monkeys do make it to Europe all the time. They were purchasing American specimens of Cambodian monkeys for further research development, if that answers your question. Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. So those specimens are quite hard to understand because they don't tell you what it is. They just give you they don't tell you what part of the body it is. They just show you the measurement. So by speaking to experts, we figured out that people were importing mostly blood and spinal fluid of these macaques for further research into that. And then we came across a couple of papers from Germany that looked into primate blood after experimentation. So that's kind of how we pieced it together. But to be honest, like that's not listed on CITES or the UN. They don't tell you what they're going to do with them. They just list it as scientific purposes.
Hi, I'm Patricia. I'm from Brazil. I have a question regarding collaboration. You mentioned a lot how everyone is happy to collaborate in the beginning, and then you have to have contracts in place. But from my experience in Brazil, especially the bigger media outlets in Brazil, they're very protective and they see everyone as competition, even though it might not be. So I wonder if you, Gustavo and Andres, you also face this challenge, and how do you navigate that? How do you convince managing editors to collaborate? How do you come up with the agreements? Who's going to publish what, when, first, second? How do you navigate that?
It's a very delicate dance, I think, always, and you have to we have like a basic ground line that we always use, and then there's some things that we change according to the partners of the project. But we always have a very simple one-pager of, with the rules we agree to, including radical sharing of information. There can be no one that shares with the other, but not the other way around. And we always, all of us, agree not only on full credits, but we publish the same day. The fact that somebody publishes before and the other one afterwards is just a no-go because it creates an imbalance. Then you can, we try to keep the rules very clear and very minimum so nobody forgets, or deliberately forgets them. Because, I mean, we have had projects where like 1 or 2 days before publication, somebody wants to jump the gun and go before everyone else. Like, this is why you need some very clear rules. But we try to make them as less formal. We don't want to make them MOUs, but at the same time, very clarity. A big problem in the larger media outlets is, of course, sometimes the editors, they vaguely know that their journalists are in some sort of collaboration, but they want to alter the story like 10 minutes before publication, which is, of course, a no-go. There's a lot of education, like permanent education on collaboration involved in this, and it's always via persuasion. Like, you have a couple of written down things, but those are like your last line, your lifeline. At the end of the day, what you have to do is just like permanently use persuasion to remind them, this is what we agreed. The reason why we agreed to this is not because we're, despotic about the date or who goes first, but because, this is like the ethos of collaboration. And and not only, larger outlets are usually harder to work with, but we've had small independent media outlets that occasionally also are reluctant to, for example, publish the same story with a media outlet from their same country, because they still see themselves as competition, even though they're working on the same project, and they probably have different audiences. And one last thing I'm going to say is that it is noticeably harder, and Anton touched on this before, but I want to sort of emphasize it, especially since we're here. It's incredibly difficult, has been historically, and I don't know, we need to figure out how to improve it, but it's been very, very difficult for media outlets in the global south. I don't really like that term, but global south, to be able to work with media outlets in the global north. There's still a lot of inequality in the way we are seen, and what I think, probably a lot of you here, because you listen to a panel on collaboration, you're already embedded with the spirit. But the takeaway sometimes is maybe what we need to show our editors and directors is that these stories are connected even up to here, Italy or the UK or Germany. That you are going to gain something you did not have from partnering up with journalists in countries like Cambodia, the Philippines, Brazil, Colombia, etc. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to make this something about whether colonialism or inequality or any of that. We want journalists to understand that we can collaborate. And some of the pieces, very, very valuable pieces that we need, you have, but at the same time, some of the very valuable pieces of the puzzle that you need, or maybe you need, but you don't need, you don't know that you need, we can help you find them. And that's the reason why we collaborate radically.
And I guess just to add to that, when I was pitching NBC and Toronto Star, the first question they asked me was, how much is this going to cost? And that's where the Pulitzer Center came in, because these collaborations were free. And that's usually, I would say, the biggest barrier. I think if I said that, to work with me and to do this collaboration, I'd need a certain amount, killed it. So I would say the grant and the Rainforest Investigations Network led to that. On top of that, definitely like the you factor. Like, yes, this is a story, and our concern always is we pitch the story, they take the information and just run it themselves. Is the you factor. Like, yes, you can run this story, this data is public, but you would need to partner with the local reporter to do this, and then making it very clear what I would need from you. So speaking to NBC and Toronto Star, I was like, I need access to Pacer. I need Bloomberg terminal access. I need to understand how these exports are working, and people could see, oh, yes, NBC does have access to this. Yes, we have an unlimited FOIA budget, which the Southeast Asia Globe did not. So making it very clear, like, this is what you bring to the table, well, as you're pitching. You don't figure that out. You put that in the initial email. Like, hey, I really wanted to partner with NBC because I've seen you do these 3 things in your past investigations, and I need you to do that again for me. What I can bring on-the-ground footage, on-the-ground sources, Cambodian government contacts. And then on top of that, I can't believe you have a 1-pager. My MOUs are like 5 pages, which is why Gustavo has such a big headache every time we try to sign one. But making that, detailing everything from what do we do when we're promoting on social media, to what do we do when we're on our panels, and how do we credit people. We really detailed the whole process. And you only have to do it once, right? Like once we did it with NBC, when we partnered with the Toronto Star, we basically copy and pasted the same thing. So I'd say, yeah, the you factor, the money, and then as detailed of a original partnership agreement in the forefront as you can.
Thank you. We have 5 more minutes. Let's try to get 2 more questions if you have. We do have one. All right.
I have a question for Andres. You mentioned about how the local communities were using your reports. I was wondering if you also actively reach out to them at one point.
During the reporting, you mean?
I mean, afterwards. Like, hey, we have this.
Absolutely. But what I meant by local communities is the ones that were not, were not the subject of these specific stories. Like we have other local communities that are using it, which I thought was interesting. No, yeah, of course. This is why we have, for us, a big thing is follow-up as well. And the only way to follow up is, of course, being in conversation with a lot of these actors, even the bad guys. Like I have several people now in these companies that I've written about that are, going back to me and saying, yeah, you should be also looking at this, or we've learned our lessons from, what you guys exposed, and we want to show you why we're now doing everything right. And it's fair enough that it works. But yeah, all the time.
Let's try to get 2 more. There's one from James there, and one there first, and then the colleague at the end. Sorry, I'll have to skip you.
Thank you for a great panel. Really enjoyed this. Andres, I wanted to ask, I know you're investigating, kind of the fraudulent carbon credit market. Did you come across carbon credit projects that are actually working well? Because it's kind of important maybe that works, at least in some cases.
A difficult question. That's James from Earth Journalism Network, which has a lot of great opportunities for grants for journalism as well. It's difficult. There's carbon projects that I know have been doing things right with communities, and then you read academic studies like there's an academic in the Netherlands that's been doing a really good job at showing which carbon projects may be inflating their results, and some of the bestly managed projects with local communities have ended up appearing also in studies on possible baseline inflation. So it's really hard to sort of like put your hands in the fire for someone when you can't guarantee that everything's working properly. So I have so far, I come from a solutions journalism background, but I have so far been reluctant to do a deep dive into a positive project because there's just so many factors that you can't account for. But I think there have to be, and I really want to report on them as well.
Okay, really short. We have 1 minute.
Hello, another question for Andres. Sorry, folks. You talked about aggressive communities for your job. Who were you referring? Which kind of communities?
Companies, not communities.
Companies. Okay.
Legally intimidating you, saying that they're going to file a lawsuit against you if you don't burn the entire piece that you wrote about them. But interesting enough, in one of those cases, it was actually, in terms of collaborating, a Spanish journalist living in Germany helped us found, there was a guy who was intimidating us, and we found out that the company, he was claiming he was a subsidiary of a German multinational, but oh surprise, the company did not appear in the German registry. So a German story appeared out of nowhere, and that settled, he forgot about us completely. He changed the name of his company. It's now, no longer in German. So it helps to collaborate even after publishing.
Okay, thank you, Andres, Anton. Again, applause for these guys. Thank you for coming. We'll be here for responding some more questions, and don't forget to check the Pulitzer Center website for your opportunities, new fellowships.
The speakers will be out